Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, whether you know Him by His name Jehovah, Adonai, Allah, or Allah, the most merciful and the most beneficent. I thank you for the opportunity that you have given me today to speak about this most cherished of holidays. And this discussion today, or this sermon, or this talk that I give today, I titled Thanksgiving and the People of the Book. Because what is remarkable about this holiday is it's so intimate to what makes America great, and it reminds all of us that we all come from the same source and from the same universal truth. In all our faiths, the act of pilgrimage is an important one. And providing an assistance or a helping hand to pilgrims is considered one of the greatest acts of charity a human can bestow on his fellow human. Whether one is traveling to the Vatican to listen to the Easter sermon by the Pope, or to the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem to pray, or to Bethlehem to visit the birthplace of Jesus, or to Mecca to worship at the Kaaba, thousands of humans seize the opportunity to help out those pilgrims. There's an innate recognition that the message of God has always been a simple one. That if we truly love Him and recognize His authority, then we must be good to each other. And no greater opportunity is that as a pilgrim travels on a spiritual journey, to kind of hitch a ride on that journey by extending a hand of charity, a hand of mercy, a hand of assistance. The very act of kindness to that pilgrim is an essential part of the spiritual journey for us all. And this act of kindness to pilgrims repeats itself in history, time and again. In one of the greatest acts of mankind, a Native American from the Abenaki tribe greets forlorn, destitute, and hungry pilgrims who have spent a cold winter on the Mayflower. True, they arrived at Plymouth Rock, but with no resources, and having arrived in late fall, they spent the winter on the Mayflower. He greets them in English. Isn't that remarkable? The mercy of God. That of all the people, and an Abenaki tribesman can greet these people in English. And he greets them in English and learns of their needs, and he leaves. But not to abandon these pilgrims. Not to give up on this opportunity to serve a universal truth. When he returns, he does not return with an army, but he returns with Squanto, a member of another tribe, the Pawtuxet. And Squanto takes it upon himself to teach the pilgrims how to grow corn, fish the rivers, draw sap, and recognize the various plants for their medicinal, edible, and potentially poisonous qualities. In a further act of godliness, of neighborliness, the Wampanoag tribe draws a treaty of mutual cooperation with these pilgrims that endures for almost 50 years. What drove these separate tribes to extend a helping hand? What could they have possibly been going to gain from foreigners with strange customs and nothing of value to give them? What benefit did they perceive by performing such acts of charity? And the answer is simple: God. Because God's message has touched all of His creations in some form or another, and in some time or another, regardless of place, regardless of circumstance. God brings hearts and minds together so that God can gift us with His mercy. Those native tribes may not have been Christian or Muslim or Jewish, but those tribes knew and they were aware of a universal truth of God. The most fundamental aspect of that truth is kindness to one another. And we can see that universal truth as we look into God's messages as He revealed them to us in the various sources. In the Bible, we find the question, where does God reveal to us how to love others? For the commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness, you shall not covet. And if there's any other commandment, all are summed up in saying, namely this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Romans 13:9. In the sayings of Muhammad ﷺ, Prophet peace be upon him, known as the Hadith, Aisha and Abdullah ibn Umar relate that the Prophet reported that Gabriel continued to strongly recommend to me to be kind to my neighbor, to continue to be kind to my neighbor to the point that I believe that my neighbor is going to inherit from me. The importance of neighborliness, of extending a helping hand. In the Jewish sources, the Talmud says, just as God clothed Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, so should we clothe those who lack adequate clothing. Just as God visited Abraham when he was weak, so should we visit the sick. Just as God buried Moses, so should we help arrange for the burial of the dead. In both Genesis and Deuteronomy. The beauty of those good deeds created a recognition among the parties that a greater power was at work. The beauty of the good deed of the Indian tribes as they helped the pilgrims. They recognized that a higher authority had to be praised, the form of which was recognized as the first Thanksgiving meal. The first festival was celebrated on November 21st and lasted 3 days. So we're a second day into the original party. Governor William Bradford invited all the settlers and neighbors and neighboring Native American tribes. Chief amongst them was Chief Masowet of the Wampanoag. The act of Thanksgiving was an act in which the bounty of that year was shared amongst all, regardless of who they were. Further reinforcing the message that being neighborly and extending a hand in friendship was an essential part of praising God. In another prophetic saying, Muhammad, peace be upon him, says, anyone who believes in Allah, God, and the last day, let him be kind to his neighbor. Anyone who believes in God and the last day, let him be hospitable to his guests. Anyone who believes in God and the last day, let him say something good or be silent. Serve wholeheartedly as if you were serving the Lord, not men, because you know that the Lord will reward everyone for whatever good he or she does, whether he or she is a slave or free. Ephesians 6:7-8. In the Torah we find, and forgive my pronunciation, Ve'havta l'erayacha komacha ani Hashem. Love your neighbor as you do yourself. I am God. Rabbi Akiva refers to this verse as the fundamental rule of the Torah. We heard a brief history of the beauty of Thanksgiving and how Thanksgiving came into part. But there is a hero who often goes forgotten. Because true, George Washington did declare a national day of Thanksgiving, but he often declared several throughout the year. It's convenient, especially when there's an election coming up. But there is a heroine for Thanksgiving in our history that we often forget, yet we use one of her verses almost all the time to our children. In 1827, Sarah Josepha Hale, author of the nursery rhyme, Mary Had a Little Lamb, launched a campaign to establish Thanksgiving as a national holiday. She sent dozens of letters to governors, senators, presidents, and other politicians. And as a testimony to the persistence of women, she spent 36 years until finally, in 1863, Abraham Lincoln relented and listened. But it is remarkable that Abraham Lincoln listened at a time of the Civil War, a time of great tragedy, a time where people have forgotten what is more important. That helping each other and serving one another is far more righteous and far more godly. And so, in 1863, in President Lincoln's proclamation, he says, entreating all Americans to ask God to commend to his tender care all those who have become widows, orphans, mourners, or sufferers in this lamentable civil strife, and to heal the wounds of the nation. He scheduled Thanksgiving for the final Thursday